In the frozen backcountry of Pine Hollow, Montana, a weary woman named Clara Whitmore was about to find more than peace in her $25 cabin. What started as a simple escape from her broken life took a chilling turn when she came face to face with children who weren't supposed to exist. Clara wasn't your typical loner. For years, she'd chased solitude through her camera lens, known for capturing forgotten places. But when she found 3 orphans hiding in her attic, her act of kindness awakened something buried, and Pine Hollow would never sleep again. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The road to Pine Hollow stretched endlessly, a thin gray ribbon winding through the white silence of Montana's backcountry. Clara Whitmore drove with both hands tight on the steering wheel, the heater blasting against the creeping chill that pressed against her windows. Snow dusted the edges of the forest, whispering across the hood of her aging Subaru. Somewhere between the valleys and forgotten farms, she felt the weight of her old life finally fall behind her. The apartment, the accident, the sterile pity of neighbors who whispered poor woman when they thought she couldn't hear. The sign for Pine Hollow, Population 612, leaned crooked in the snow, its paint half peeled. She slowed as the first few cabins came into view, the town's single street lined with shuttered stores and rusted trucks. This was a place the world had forgotten, exactly what she needed. Inside the town hall, the clerk handed her the property deed with a mix of curiosity and pity. "Cabins out past the North Ridge," he said. "Nobody's lived there since—" His words trailed off. "Since when?" Clara asked. "Since the Harpers disappeared," another voice answered. Sheriff Amos Laird stood by the doorway, his frame filling it completely. His badge looked older than he was, dulled by decades of use. He eyed Clara like he'd seen her before, though she knew he hadn't. "You're not from around here?" "No," she said, tucking the deed into her coat. "Just needed a change." The sheriff's jaw tightened. "Some things ain't meant to be bought, Miss Whitmore, especially not that house." She met his gaze, calm and polite. "I'll take my chances." He almost smiled, a tired, humorless thing. "You already have?" By the time Clara reached the property, the light had thinned to a pale, dying gold. The cabin sat crouched in the clearing like a wounded animal. Weather-beaten wood, a sagging roof, and shuttered windows that looked more like sealed eyes. Her boots sank deep into the snow as she stepped out, the silence around her absolute. Even the birds had gone still. Inside, the air was thick with dust and decay. Each step stirred the ghosts of years gone by. A rusted tricycle in the corner, faded wallpaper printed with flowers, an overturned table where the wood had darkened from rot. On the mantel sat a row of framed photographs, the Harper family, smiling stiffly at the camera. A man, a woman, and 3 small children. The glass was cracked through the mother's face. Clara brushed the photo clean, her fingers trembling despite herself. "What happened to you?" she murmured. Her own voice startled her. It had been weeks since she'd spoken to anyone without formality or guarded tone. Here, in the vastness of Pine Hollow, she could almost hear the echo of the woman she used to be, the one who'd laughed, dreamed, and planned for a life that ended on a winter highway 3 years ago. The same season, the same snow. Now she was starting over, one nail, one wall, one ghost of herself at a time. That night the wind rose like a chorus of lost things. Clara sat near the old stove, wrapped in a quilt she'd found in a chest, flipping through her camera's memory card. Landscapes of places she'd left behind. Coastlines, deserts, faces blurred in motion. Each one felt distant now, a record of a world she could never re-enter. Then she heard it, a laugh, faint, high-pitched, a child's. She froze, lowering the camera. The wind howled again, scraping against the roof. But beneath it, she swore she heard footsteps, small ones, running above her. Her rational mind reached for the easy explanations, loose beams, animals in the rafters, her own exhaustion. Still, her pulse quickened as she picked up the lantern and stepped toward the narrow staircase leading to the attic. The steps creaked under her boots, each groan echoing in the stillness. Halfway up, something shifted above. a whisper of movement. The lantern's flame flickered wildly, casting long, reaching shadows up the stairs. "Hello?" she called softly. "Is someone up there?" Only silence answered, followed by a sound she couldn't mistake this time, the faint humming of a lullaby, old, familiar, the same melody her mother used to hum on sleepless nights when Clara was a child. The flame steadied again. She took another cautious step. In that moment, she wasn't just climbing toward a sound. She was climbing toward something deeper, the feeling that her isolation wasn't as empty as she thought, the sense that the mountain itself was watching, waiting. The wind pressed against the cabin walls like a living thing. The last step creaked as she reached the landing. The attic door loomed ahead, slightly ajar, a faint draught spilling through the crack. For a long moment, Clara stood there, her breath misting in the air, the lantern trembling in her hand. Her rational mind whispered to turn back, but her heart, that wounded, stubborn heart that refused to die, pushed her forward. She touched the handle. Outside, the blizzard began, and inside, from beyond the door, came the unmistakable sound of children laughing. Marcus's hand trembled slightly as it hovered near the old brass handle of the attic door. The storm howled outside, rattling the windows and pressing cold fingers through the cracks in the old wood. Clara, tightened her grip on the flashlight, its beam slicing through the darkness. The light trembled with her heartbeat, illuminating dust motes that swirled like snowflakes caught in slow motion. For a moment, she hesitated. Every instinct screamed to turn back. The laughter she'd heard earlier, soft, almost playful, had no business existing in this kind of silence. Yet it persisted, faint but distinct, like echoes from another life. And the footprints she'd seen in the dust downstairs, small, barefoot, hadn't been her imagination. The attic door creaked open with a reluctant groan. Cold air spilled out, tinged with something sweet and stale, like old cedar and apple rot. The flashlight beams swept over a clutter of forgotten belongings, broken picture frames, cracked porcelain dolls, an old crib draped with moth-eaten blankets. And then movement, a quick flicker in the shadows. "Hello?" Clara's voice was low, calm, the tone she used when approaching wild animals during her photography trips. "It's okay. I'm not here to hurt you," a whisper. Then another. Shapes shifted behind the stacks of boxes. She crouched, her knees brushing the dusty floorboards. Her breath clouded the air before her. "If someone's up here, you don't have to hide." "It's freezing." Something small darted from behind an old trunk, a flash of movement, then stillness. The beam caught a pale face, a girl, thin as a reed, her hair a tangled mess of straw and shadow. Her eyes, dark and sharp, watched Clara with the wary calculation of an animal cornered. Behind her, two smaller figures emerged. A boy clutching a notebook to his chest, and a little girl in a faded nightgown, her bare feet blue with cold. Clara froze. "Oh my God! We live here!" the eldest girl said before Clara could finish. Her voice was small but firm. "You shouldn't be here. I bought this cabin," Clara managed. "I didn't know anyone—" "You can't buy it," the girl interrupted again. "It's ours." The boy's eyes were fixed on the flashlight beam, squinting as if the light hurt him. He had the gaunt, watchful face of a child who had learned too soon not to speak unless necessary. The smallest girl, however, simply stared past Clara, humming softly. A lullaby, thin and haunting, threaded through the air, matching the rhythm of the storm outside. It was familiar, too familiar. Clara's chest tightened. That melody. Her mother used to hum it. She hadn't heard it since childhood, but the memory rose unbidden. The smell of lavender oil, her mother's hand brushing her hair, the same tune whispered on lonely nights. She swallowed hard. "Who taught you that song, sweetheart?" The little girl didn't answer. She just smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carried no warmth. The older girl stepped forward, protective. "Don't talk to her," she said sharply. "You'll scare her." Clara raised her free hand in peace. "I'm not here to scare anyone. I just want to make sure you're safe." "We're fine," the girl said. "We always are." "Always?" The boy shifted his weight, finally speaking, his voice quiet and oddly flat. "We've always lived here. Since before the snow." Something cold settled in Clara's stomach. Before the snow. The storm that had taken the Harper family. That was over 20 years ago. "Okay," she said carefully, choosing her words. "Why don't you come downstairs?"
"There's a fire."
"It's warm. You can tell me about your parents." At that, the eldest girl's face changed. Her expression hardened into something that looked too old for her 13 years. "They're gone," she said. "Everyone's gone." The boy clutched his notebook tighter. "Except us." A long silence followed, broken only by the storm battering the roof. Clara's instincts, the same that once guided her through deserts, jungles, and endless landscapes, told her this was no ordinary situation. Something was deeply wrong. But she couldn't just leave them there. "All right," she said softly. "You can stay here tonight. I'll get some blankets." When she returned minutes later with food and a thermos of cocoa, the children hadn't moved. They ate cautiously, like feral creatures testing a trap. "Do you have names?" she asked. The eldest hesitated. "Elsie," the boy whispered. "Tommy." The littlest girl just hummed again, staring into the flame of Clara's flashlight. "That's June," Elsie said finally. "She doesn't talk much," Clara smiled gently. "It's nice to meet you, Elsie. Tommy? June?" Tommy's eyes flicked up. "You shouldn't stay here," he murmured. "Why not?" He turned his notebook around and showed her a drawing, rough pencil lines on yellowed paper, a cabin beneath swirling snow, figures in the trees, eyes in the bark, and a woman standing at the door, her face unmistakably Clara's. Clara's heart stuttered. "Where did you get this?" "I draw what I see," Tommy said. "The mountain shows me." "The mountain?" Elsie reached over and closed the notebook. "He dreams too much," she said sharply. "Don't listen to him." Clara wanted to press further, but the fear in Elsie's eyes stopped her. So she said nothing. Instead, she helped them lay out blankets, tucking June's small frame beneath an old quilt. As she turned to leave, the little girl reached out, clutching Clara's sleeve. "Don't go downstairs," June whispered. Her voice was soft, fragile, but her eyes were deadly serious. "He's still there." Clara's skin went cold. "Who?" June's small finger pointed toward the floorboards. "The man under the house." For a long, trembling second, Clara couldn't breathe. But when she looked back, June was already asleep, or pretending to be. Downstairs, the fire had dimmed to embers. Clara sat beside it, the events replaying in her head. The children's pale faces, their strange calm, that lullaby, and Tommy's drawing, her likeness rendered in a notebook that couldn't possibly predate her arrival. Outside, the wind screamed through the pines. The walls creaked with age. Somewhere above, the faint patter of footsteps moved across the ceiling, slow, deliberate. She looked up, every nerve on edge. "Elsie," she called softly. No answer. Then 3 knocks, not from above this time. From beneath, a hollow, rhythmic thud once, twice, 3 times. Her breath hitched. She stared at the floorboards. The knocking stopped as suddenly as it began. The firelight flickered, stretching her shadow across the walls, and then faintly, from the attic above, the lullaby began again. This time, the voice wasn't June's. It was older, colder, and it sang her name. The storm had not stopped. It had only changed its shape. By morning, the snow had quieted into a slow, constant drift that blanketed Pine Hollow in a silence almost sacred. The kind of silence that swallows your breath before you realize you're holding it. Clara stood by the cabin window, her coffee cooling in her hands, staring out at the pale blur of the forest. The world outside was an indistinct smear of white and grey, the pines rising like ghostly sentinels. She hadn't slept. Not really. The night replayed in fragments. June's whisper. The 3 knocks beneath the floorboards. The lullaby that had changed halfway through the song, turning from a child's hum into something else, something older. When dawn came, she'd climbed back into the attic. It was empty. The blankets she'd given the children were still there. The thermos rolled to one side, but the children themselves were gone. No footprints, no sign they'd ever existed. But their smell lingered, faint soap, must in something cold like wet stone. Now, As she sipped the bitter coffee, Clara tried to reason it through. Exhaustion, maybe. Isolation and grief could do strange things to the mind. Still, that didn't explain Tommy's drawings. She'd found his notebook where he'd left it. The last page had changed overnight, a sketch of the cabin again. Only now, a man's face stared out from beneath the floorboards. That was when she decided to call someone. She found the number for the local ranger station scribbled on a flyer in town. The man who answered sounded like he'd just woken up. Pine Hollow Ranger Service. Reeves speaking? "Hi," Clara said, trying to sound casual. "My name's Clara Whitmore. I just moved into the old Harper place." There was a pause on the other end. "The Harper place? You mean the one out past Miller's Creek?" "That's the one." The man exhaled sharply. "You realize that place has been condemned for 20 years, right? It's not exactly safe for habitation. I'm aware," Clara said dryly. "Look, I just wanted to report something. Strange, there were children last night in my attic." Another pause, longer this time. "Children. Yes, 3 of them. They said their names were Elsie, Tommy, and June Harper." A low chuckle came through the receiver, but it didn't sound amused. "That's not funny, ma'am. I'm not joking, because those names belong to the family that disappeared up there 2 decades ago. Parents and 3 kids. They never found the bodies." Clara's stomach turned cold. "So you've heard of them." "Everyone's heard of them," Reeves said. "You should probably come down to the station. We'll talk." The ranger station was a squat log building off the main highway, half buried under a crust of snow. Clara parked beside a battered green pickup and stepped out, her boots sinking into the slush. The cold bit into her lungs like glass. Inside, the station smelled of coffee, old wood, and wet wool. A man in his mid-30s looked up from behind a desk piled with paperwork. His hair was dark, his jaw shadowed with stubble, and he had the kind of wary posture that spoke of someone used to long silences. "Nate Reeves," he said, standing and offering his hand. "You must be the woman who bought the Harper place." "That's right." His handshake was firm but brief. "I've got to say, not many folks would want to live up there." "I'm not most folks," Clara replied with a faint smile that didn't reach her eyes. Nate studied her for a moment. "Guess not." He motioned to a chair. "So tell me what happened." She explained everything, the laughter, the children, the drawings, the knocking beneath the floor. She expected disbelief, maybe even a smirk, but Nate listened quietly, his expression unreadable. When she mentioned the children's names, he stiffened. "Elsie, Tommy, June," he repeated. "You're sure?" "Yes." He leaned back, rubbing his jaw. "You ever hear about the Pine Hollow blizzard? Winter of '03? "I think so. A few people died, right?" "7, he said. 2 of them were my parents. 1 was my sister." His voice didn't waver, but there was something brittle beneath it. "She was 14. Evelyn Reeves. She used to babysit the Harper kids." Clara's breath caught. I'm sorry," he shrugged, but the motion was hollow. "No one ever found their bodies. The mountains swallowed them whole, far as anyone could tell. The sheriff called it nature's cruelty." "Sheriff Laird," she murmured. Nate's gaze flicked up sharply. "You've met him?" "He was there when I signed the deed. Told me some things aren't meant to be bought." Nate let out a humorless laugh. "That sounds like him." They sat in silence for a moment. The clock on the wall ticked softly. Finally, Nate said, "I'll drive up there with you, just to take a look." The drive back to Pine Hollow took nearly an hour, the ranger's truck crawling along the snow-covered road. Clara sat in silence, staring at the blur of trees passing by. "You really think you saw them?" Nate asked at last. "I don't know what I saw," she admitted, "but I didn't imagine those drawings. You'll see." When they reached the cabin, the storm clouds had begun to clear, revealing thin shafts of winter sunlight cutting through the pines. The snow was untouched, no footprints near the steps. Inside, the air felt colder than before. The fire had long since gone out. Clara led him upstairs to the attic. "They were right here." Nate scanned the room, flashlight beams sweeping over the dust and shadows. "No sign of anyone living here recently. No prints, no bedding." She picked up the notebook from the floor. This was his, Tommy's. He flipped through it, frowning. "These look old, like decades old," she blinked. "What do you mean?" "Paper's yellowed. Ink faded. Some of these sketches, look here. He turned the book toward her. One drawing showed a young girl with long hair, wearing an old-fashioned coat. Underneath, faintly written, were the initials, E.R. Evelyn Reeves, Clara whispered. Nate's hand tightened on the notebook. That's my sister. They descended into silence. Even the wind seemed to still. Clara spoke first. I found something else outside yesterday. An old well, half buried near the tree line. I thought it was just debris, Nate frowned. There shouldn't be a well up here. Closest one's half a mile down the ridge. Then what is it? Let's find out. They trudged through the snow, the forest creaking around them. The air smelled of pine sap and frost. Clara led him to the spot, a low mound half swallowed by drifts, where the stone ring of an old well jutted up from the ground. Nate crouched and brushed the snow away with his gloved hand. This is old. Maybe early 1900s. Could have been used by the original settlers. He leaned closer. Wait, what's that? Something glinted at the edge of the stones. He reached down and pulled out a small metal object, a locket, its chain broken, its surface tarnished, but still faintly engraved with initials. Nate stared at it, his face pale. It's hers. How can you be sure? Clara asked softly. I gave this to her the Christmas before she disappeared. They both stood there for a long time, the forest around them deathly quiet. Finally, Nate pocketed the locket and said, we should get back inside. Storm's picking up again. By evening, the sky had darkened into a bruised purple. Clara made a small fire while Nate sat at the table, turning the locket over in his hands. You said the boy drew what he saw, Nate said after a while. Think he could have seen this? I think he saw everything. He looked at her, studying the exhaustion on her face. You really believe they're still here? I don't know what I believe, but something's wrong with this place. It feels awake. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stood and walked to the window. Outside, the forest swayed under the wind's push. When I was a kid, he said quietly, my dad used to tell me the mountain was alive. Said it remembers things. Every tragedy, every secret, it keeps them buried. But sometimes it gives them back. Clara met his gaze. Do you think that's what this is? The mountain remembering? Before he could answer, a sound echoed through the cabin, a soft thud, followed by the faint creak of a door upstairs. They froze. Another sound followed, a shuffle, like small feet across the floorboards. Stay here, Nate said. Drawing his flashlight, Clara followed anyway, her heart hammering. They climbed the stairs together, the light beam trembling across the hall. The attic door stood half open. Inside, the air was frigid. The blankets she'd left for the children were disturbed, as if someone had just stood up. And on the far wall, carved roughly into the wood, were 3 words, We remember you. Nate's breath caught. What the hell? Clara stepped closer. The letters were carved deep, as if by small, desperate hands. The wood was fresh. Splinters still curled at the edges. Behind them, something clattered to the floor. They turned. Tommy's notebook had fallen from the shelf. The pages fluttered open to a new drawing, 3 children standing beneath the trees, looking up at a woman's figure. Above them, the sky churned with snow. Beneath them, a shape in the ground, a grave, and scrawled in the boy's shaky handwriting, Don't dig where the roots twist. Nate's face had gone pale. That mound by the well. Did you notice the tree growing beside it? Yes, the roots were split in a spiral, like something was buried there. Before Clara could respond, the light flickered and went out. Darkness swallowed the room. Then, faintly from somewhere in the cabin below, came the sound of a child's laughter. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't kind. It was ancient. They descended in silence, flashlights cutting through the dark. The laughter had stopped. Only the fire's dim glow remained, but there on the table lay something new. A photograph. Clara approached slowly. The image was black and white, faded at the edges. It showed 2 families standing side by side in front of the same cabin, smiling stiffly for the camera. On one side, the Harpers. On the other, the Whitmores, and in the center, holding hands, were 2 little girls, Elsie Harper and Clara Whitmore. Her vision swam. This can't be real. Nate stepped beside her. "That's you." "No," she whispered, shaking her head. My mother never told me." A sudden gust of wind slammed the shutters, extinguishing the fire. The photo lifted into the air, spinning once before landing face down on the floor. On its back, scrawled in pencil, were the same words from the attic. "We remember you." The figures at the edge of the forest didn't move. They simply stood there, three small silhouettes, faint against the pale wash of the snow and moonlight. For a moment, Clara thought they were shadows cast by the branches. But then one of them, June, lifted a hand and waved. Nate's breath came out in a white cloud. "You see that too, right?" "Yes," Clara whispered. "They're waiting." He pulled his coat tighter and looked toward the front door. "We shouldn't go out there in this storm." But Clara was already reaching for her boots. "They came back for a reason." Nate caught her arm. "A reason that might get us killed." She met his eyes. "Or one that might explain why this place won't let them rest." For a moment, he looked like he wanted to argue, but then he sighed, grabbed his flashlight and said, "Fine, but stay behind me." They stepped into the storm. The cold hit like a slap, fierce, howling wind that tugged at their coats and filled their lungs with ice. The snow had deepened overnight, nearly knee-high now. The pines loomed black and tall, their branches groaning under the weight. The children didn't move as Clara and Nate trudged toward them. They stood by the old well, pale faces lit faintly by the moonlight filtering through the clouds. June still held the tattered doll in her arms. Clara's heart pounded. "June?" The little girl tilted her head. Her lips moved, but the sound came out like the wind itself. Soft, broken. "You came back." "I never left," Clara said, not even knowing why she said it. The boy, Tommy, stepped forward. His eyes were wide and hollow. "You have to stop it." Nate raised his flashlight, his hand shaking. "Stop what?" The boy pointed toward the well. "It's underneath. The roots." The wind rose suddenly, flinging snow across the clearing. For a moment, the beam of the flashlight illuminated something just beyond the well. A figure, barely visible. Tall, still, watching. Then it was gone. Nate swore under his breath. "We're leaving," but Clara shook her head. "They're afraid." The smallest child, Elsie, was crying now. Her tears froze on her cheeks like tiny beads of glass. "We didn't mean to wake it up," she said. "We just wanted to go home." Before Clara could answer, the ground trembled beneath their feet, faintly at first, then harder. The snow at the base of the well began to shift. Nate grabbed Clara's arm and pulled her back. "Move!" The old stones groaned, splitting apart as something underneath began to heave upward, not metal, not bone, but wood. Thick roots, black and slick with ice, twisting and writhing as if alive. Clara stumbled backward, her heart hammering. The roots spread out like the fingers of a buried giant, clutching at the air. The children screamed. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The roots froze in place. The forest went dead quiet again, and when Clara looked back toward the children, they were gone. They didn't speak until they were back inside. Nate slammed the door shut and bolted it. The fire was out again, and the cabin seemed colder than before. Clara sank onto a chair, her hands shaking. "What was that?" "I don't know," Nate said, pacing. "Maybe a sinkhole, maybe—" "Don't lie to me." He stopped and met her eyes. For a long moment neither spoke. Then he said quietly, "There's something under this mountain. I've heard stories since I was a kid, about people disappearing near old roots, about wells that weren't really wells." Clara frowned. "What are they, then?" He hesitated. "Burial shafts, from before the first settlers. The tribes that lived here." He took a slow breath. "They believed the mountain was a gate, that when someone died unjustly, the roots took them in, so the mountain could remember their pain." Her voice was barely a whisper. "And if the mountain remembers too much?" He didn't answer. That night, Clara dreamed. She was standing in the forest, but it wasn't winter anymore. The trees were green, the air warm and humming with cicadas. Children laughed nearby, familiar voices. When she turned, she saw the Hoppers, alive and smiling. Their mother waved from the porch of the same cabin, its wood new and golden in the sunlight. "Come inside, Clara," she called. "It's almost supper." Her name again, Clara, spoken like an old memory. She walked toward them, her feet bare on the soft earth. But as she stepped onto the porch, the world began to fade, the light dimming, the air growing heavy. The laughter twisted into screams, the door burst open, and the same roots she'd seen at the well tore through the walls, dragging the family into the ground one by one. The last thing she saw was June reaching for her, eyes wide and terrified. "Help us, Clara," the girl cried. "You promised you wouldn't forget." Clara woke with a scream, gasping for air. The cabin was silent. But across the room, Nate was awake too, sitting by the table, staring at the notebook. "You were talking in your sleep," he said quietly. "You said their names." Clara wiped the sweat from her forehead. "They showed me what happened." He looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" "They didn't die in the storm. They were taken." By morning, the storm had calmed again, leaving the world buried in a quiet that felt almost reverent. Clara sat by the window, watching sunlight glint off the snow. Nate was fixing the generator out back when he called her name. "You need to see this." She pulled on her coat and stepped outside. The cold bit her cheeks instantly. Nate was kneeling by the base of the porch steps, brushing snow away from something buried beneath the boards. It was a wooden trapdoor, old but sturdy, hidden under a layer of ice. A rusted padlock held it shut. "Guess your floorboards weren't the only thing with secrets," Nate said. Clara's pulse quickened. "You think this leads to the well?" "Only one way to find out." He used a crowbar from his truck to snap the lock. The wood groaned as the door swung open, releasing a wave of stale, cold air. A narrow set of steps led downward into darkness. Nate flicked on his flashlight. "You first or me?" She forced a shaky smile. "Ladies first, right?" They descended carefully, the steps creaking under their weight. The air grew damp and cold. At the bottom, the tunnel opened into a small underground chamber, walls of stone, ceiling low enough that they had to stoop. Roots hung from above like veins, and in the center of the room was a pile of small wooden boxes. Coffins, 3 of them. Clara's breath hitched. "Oh my God!" Each box was carved with a name: Elsie Harper, Tommy Harper, June Harper. Nate knelt beside them, brushing dust away. "Who buried them here?" Clara's gaze drifted to the far wall, where something faintly glimmered, the corner of another box, half buried beneath roots. She reached out and brushed away the dirt. The carving on this one was almost illegible, but she could still make out the name. Evelyn Reeves. Nate froze. "No, it's her," Clara whispered. "Your sister." He stood, trembling. "She's been here this whole time." As he spoke, a low, creaking sound echoed through the tunnel. The roots above them began to move, tightening around the ceiling. A deep groan reverberated through the ground. "Back!" Nate shouted. "Move!" They scrambled toward the stairs as the tunnel began to collapse. Dirt and splinters rained down, and a long, guttural sound rose from beneath the coffins. Not quite a voice, but something close. It sounded like breathing. They burst through the trapdoor and slammed it shut, just as the ground below heaved once more. The boards beneath their feet shuddered. Nate backed away, chest heaving. "That thing, it's alive!" Clara leaned against the wall, tears stinging her eyes. "They weren't haunting the cabin. They were warning us." "About what?" She looked toward the window, where the forest stretched silent and endless. "About what's still buried. They spent the next day packing. Nate wanted to leave, to call the sheriff, the rangers, anyone who could seal off the area. But Clara couldn't shake the feeling that leaving now would only make things worse. That night, she sat alone by the dying fire, staring at the photograph they'd found. The edges were burned now, the faces fading. She turned it over. The message on the back had changed again. "Don't let it remember more." Her pulse quickened. She thought of the roots beneath the well, the buried coffins, the whispering children. If the mountain remembered pain, what would happen if it remembered too much? She didn't sleep. Instead, she went outside with a lantern and walked toward the well one last time. The forest was still, the moon high and white. The mound was there, the spiral roots twisting up from the earth. She knelt and set the lantern beside it. "I remember," she whispered. "I remember you." The ground shifted ever so slightly. For a moment she thought she saw the children again, standing around her, faces calm now, no longer afraid. June smiled. Then one by one they began to fade, their outlines dissolving into the mist. Clara felt warmth spread through her chest. Sadness. Yes, but also release. The lantern flickered, and from deep beneath the soil, a final whisper rose. The sun rose over Pine Hollow the next morning in a pale wash of gold. The snow had thinned, and for the first time in days, light touched the valley below the cabin. Steam curled from the pines, and a deep silence lingered, like the land itself was holding its breath. Clara stood by the window, arms wrapped tight around herself, staring out at the grave beneath the oak. It was peaceful now, still, but beneath that peace she felt something, an undercurrent of dread that wouldn't let go. Because peace in Pine Hollow never lasted long. Behind her, Nate packed his gear. "We should head down before the next storm. Roads'll freeze by nightfall." Clara didn't turn around. "I'm not leaving yet," he paused. "You said it was over." "I thought it was," she murmured. "But last night, I heard something." He looked up. "Heard what?" Her voice was low. "Knocking. From under the floor again." They pried up the floorboards after breakfast. The wood groaned and cracked as Nate pulled back the last plank, revealing the same crawl space where Clara had found the Harper box before. Only this time the dirt beneath was disturbed, freshly turned. "There," she whispered. They dug with shovels until Nate's hit something solid. Not wood, not stone, metal. They cleared more of the soil until the shape became clear, an old storm cellar door, bolted shut from the inside. Nate frowned. "That's not in any of the blueprints. This place shouldn't even have a basement." Clara's heart pounded. "Maybe that's why it's still here." The bolt came loose with a metallic shriek. The smell hit first, damp earth, mold, and something else underneath. Something sharp, coppery. She shined her flashlight down. Wooden steps disappeared into darkness. Nate took a breath. "You sure about this?" Clara's fingers were white around the flashlight handle. "No." They descended anyway. The air grew colder with each step. The smell worsened, rot, like waterlogged wood and rusted iron. The beam cut through dust motes that swirled thick as fog. At the bottom they found a narrow tunnel carved directly into the earth. The walls were reinforced with wooden beams that had long since begun to rot. Strange carvings covered them, spirals, eyes, symbols that looked half religious, half feral. "What the hell is this?" Nate muttered. Clara brushed her hand across one of the carvings. It was a circle of interlocking roots, almost like the oak trees. Then, from deeper in the tunnel, came a sound, scratching, slow and deliberate. Nate raised his flashlight. "Animals, maybe—" "No." Clara's voice was barely a whisper. "Listen." The scratching stopped. Then 3 knocks, just like before. The flashlight flickered. When it steadied, something glimmered ahead, a figure crouched in the shadows, its face pale beneath a film of dirt. "Hello," Clara called. The figure moved, slowly at first, then quicker, dragging itself toward them. "Back!" Nate shouted, stepping forward, his hand on the handle of his knife. The figure stumbled into the light, a man, or what was left of one. His skin was grey and torn, his eyes cloudy. But his expression, one of relief, froze Clara in place. "Please," he rasped. "Help me." Nate froze. "Holy Clara, he's alive!" They hauled him up the stairs, his breath shallow and wheezing. His clothes were old, early 2000s maybe. His face was scarred, his beard matted with dirt. When they reached the firelight, the man collapsed onto the floor, trembling violently. "Water," Clara said, rushing to fetch some. When she handed it to him, his hands shook too much to hold it. Nate steadied the cup. After a moment, the man spoke again. "You opened it. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." "The cellar?" Clara asked. He nodded. "Shouldn't have opened it. Should have stayed shut." "Who are you?" Nate asked. The man coughed a wet sound. "Name's Dale Harper." Clara's breath caught. "Harper? You're their father." He looked at her, and for a second there was something lucid behind his eyes. "You saw them, didn't you?" Clara nodded slowly. Elsie, Tommy, June. Dale's expression twisted in pain. They never left. I tried to keep them here. Keep them safe. You buried them, Nate said quietly. Dale flinched. The mountain took them, said it needed them, said I could have them back if I fed it more. His eyes darted toward the floorboards. It lies, the mountain? Clara asked. The thing under it. His voice dropped to a whisper. It's old, older than this place. It don't care about people, it just eats what we give it. He looked directly at Clara now. You remember me, don't you? She hesitated, a flash of memory, a man's voice shouting her name, hands lifting her through a trapdoor, the sound of wind and screaming below. You were there, she whispered. He nodded weakly. Your mama begged me to take you when the blizzard came. I did, I got you out. But she stayed. The mountain didn't let her go. Clara felt like the floor dropped out beneath her. Martha. Nate looked between them. Your mother was part of this. Dale's eyes glazed over again. She made the pact before me, before the Harpers. The mountain always takes its due. He began coughing again, harder this time. Blood flecked his lips. Clara knelt beside him, panicked. Dale, stay with me, please. He grabbed her wrist with surprising strength. It's not done yet. The mountain wants another. Then his grip loosened, and he went still. Nate checked his pulse. Nothing. They buried Dale beside his children, though the ground felt colder now, harder to dig. The sky had turned gray again. When they finished, Nate looked at her. You believe him? Clara stared at the mound. I don't want to, but the mountain's not finished with us. He said it wants another. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. The wind was low, steady, almost like breathing. She sat by the fire, staring at the locket in her hands. Then faintly she heard it again, knocking. But not from under the floor this time. From the walls. She followed the sound to the hallway. The wallpaper rippled slightly, as if something beneath it moved. Please, a voice whispered. She tore at the paper until a small panel came loose, revealing another cavity in the wall. Inside was an old journal wrapped in oilcloth. The cover read, Martha Whitmore, 1987. Clara's throat went dry. She opened it carefully. The first pages were ordinary diary entries, talk of winter storms, of loneliness. But as the entries went on, the handwriting grew frantic. He came to me in the snow, said I could have my daughter back if I gave him what he wanted. I didn't understand until it was too late. The Harpers! They were just the first. Clara's hands trembled. Her mother had made a bargain. Another entry, scrawled so violently the pen tore the paper. The mountain isn't a place. It's a hunger. It remembers blood. If you dig deep enough, it will find you. It always finds its own. The final line stopped her cold. If she ever comes back. Tell Clara to run. She closed the book, but it was too late for running. The walls began to hum again, low, vibrating, alive. The window frosted over. The fire sputtered and died. And from beneath the house came a long, slow creak, like the earth itself shifting. Nate burst from the other room, gun in hand. Clara, what's happening? The mountain, she said, voice shaking. It's waking up, the floor buckled. The beams groaned. Then, with a deafening crack, the cellar door blew open. A freezing gust tore through the cabin, carrying the smell of soil and decay. From the darkness below, something massive stirred, a wet sucking sound like roots tearing through mud. Nate grabbed Clara, dragging her toward the door. Go, now! They stumbled outside into the blizzard that had returned full force. The snow burned against their skin. Behind them, the cabin shuddered, its walls bending inward as if being pulled by invisible hands. A sound rose from below, a moan deep and ancient. They ran through the trees, breath coming in sharp bursts. The storm howled around them. When they reached the ridge, Clara turned back. The cabin was gone. Only the oak tree remained, its roots stretched wide, half buried in what had once been the foundation. And beneath the snow, faintly, something pulsed. They took shelter in Nate's truck at the ranger station down the mountain. Neither spoke for a long time. Finally, Nate broke the silence. You think it's over? Clara looked out the window. The mountain loomed dark against the horizon, its peaks lost in cloud. No, she whispered. I think it's waiting. Later that night, After Nate fell asleep in his chair, Clara stepped outside. The air was still, the sky was clear, and then she saw it across the valley. A faint orange glow flickered beneath the pines, like firelight coming from underground. She closed her eyes. "Not yet," she whispered to the mountain. "You can't have me yet." But far off in the woods, under the crust of snow and soil, something ancient stirred, patient, knowing. It had taken her family once. It would wait as long as it needed to take her too. And from deep beneath the ground, faint and rhythmic, the knocking began again. 3 times, pause, 3 more, just enough to let her know it was listening. The morning after the storm broke, Pine Hollow was silent. The kind of silence that follows something ancient finally exhaling. The mountains stood under a pale gold sky, steam rising from the snow where the light touched. Clara Whitmore stood on the cabin porch, wrapped in Nate's spare jacket, eyes hollow, coffee untouched. The cabin no longer groaned. It breathed easy now, wood settling, roof dripping slowly under the melting frost. For the first time since she'd arrived, she could hear birds. Down in the valley, smoke curled from the town again. The roads were still half buried, but Sheriff Laird's truck managed the climb, crunching over ice until it stopped beside the cabin. He climbed out, older somehow, hat pulled low. "Heard the storm broke faster up here," he said, though his eyes didn't meet hers. "Guess that's something." Nate came out behind her, sleeves rolled, tired but steady. "We found what was under the cabin, Amos. The hollow's real." The sheriff gave a weary chuckle that wasn't amusement. "Course it is. The mountain always collects its dues. Question is, what did it take this time?" Clara's fingers tightened around the mug. "It didn't take anyone. It's done." Laird's eyes flicked to her face, sharp, searching. "You sure about that?" "I ended it." Her voice trembled just a little. "The pact's broken." He spat into the snow. "That's what your grandmother said too." Nate stepped forward. "You knew Ruth Whitmore." "Everyone did," Laird said. "She came back after that first winter. Same eyes you've got, Miss Whitmore. Said the mountain was quiet. Then 3 years later, another blizzard. My daddy found a family frozen in their house 2 valleys over. Arperkin." He looked up at the ridge. "The mountain don't forget. Just sleeps." Clara's chest tightened. "Then I'll make sure it never wakes again." The sheriff stared for a long moment, then turned toward his truck. "If I were you, I'd leave this place. Burn it down, salt the soil, and don't look back." The engine groaned, and he was gone, leaving only exhaust fading into the cold air. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. The children's absence was everywhere, the stillness where their whispers had been, the silence where June's lullaby used to float. She wandered through the cabin with a lantern, touching the walls, the window frames, the banister worn smooth by countless hands. On the mantel lay Tommy's sketchbook. She hesitated, then opened it. The last page showed the same cabin drawn in charcoal lines. But this time there was no snow, only a bright field of grass and a single oak tree standing beside it. At the bottom, written in his careful scrawl, "When the spring comes, remember us." Her throat ached. From the corner of the room, Nate spoke quietly. "You okay?" She nodded, though tears blurred her vision. "They're gone, Nate, but I feel like they're still here, just quieter." He moved closer, hand brushing her shoulder. "Maybe that's how peace sounds." Clara smiled faintly. "You think peace exists up here?" He looked out the window at the ridge, where dawn was beginning to burn through the fog. "I think it does now." Over the next week, they cleared the snow and repaired what they could. The cabin's roof held firm. The old oak out front stood tall, branches bare but unbroken. They buried the old relics, the dolls, the letters, the bones, together in a simple grave marked by stone. Clara planted the dried flower from Ruth's box atop it, pressing it gently into the soil. When they finished, Nate said, "You could sell this land. Move back to town. Start over." She shook her head. "This is where it ends. My family's mistakes, the Harpers' suffering, it all happened here. I want something good to grow from it." He smiled, small but proud. "Then I'll make sure you're not alone doing it." But Pine Hollow wasn't done remembering. 3 nights later, a fire broke out in the old church near the edge of town. The bell tower collapsed before the volunteer crew could reach it. Locals whispered it was lightning, though the sky had been clear. Laird showed up at Clara's cabin again, soot still on his coat. "The church burned where the first pact was signed," he said grimly. "The mountain's cleansing itself," Clara frowned. "Or warning us," he didn't disagree. "Either way, it's your blood it started with. Maybe it's yours that can finish it." He handed her a folded paper, an old land deed, brittle and yellow. "Found this in the county records. Property line runs deeper than we thought. Includes the mine shaft down the ridge. Your grandmother sealed it off in 47. Clara took it carefully. "Why?" Laird's jaw tightened. "Because that's where the first offering was made. They hiked there the next morning. The air was bitterly still, pine needles snapping underfoot. After half an hour, the snow thinned and the ground opened into a rocky cleft. The entrance to the mine was half buried under ice. Rusted rails led into darkness, half eaten by frost. Clara's lantern beam caught a shape carved into the stone arch, the same symbol she'd seen on the altar, the interlocking circle and triangle. "This isn't just a mine," she said softly. "It's where it started." They moved deeper inside, the air turning colder with every step. The tunnel walls glistened with veins of frozen water that looked almost like glass. And then ahead they saw it, another chamber, smaller but eerily familiar, a shallow pit in the center, black and bottomless. Around it, faded markings that looked like runes. Nate's voice echoed. "The Hollow's heart." Clara approached the edge. Something shimmered in the pit, blue light, faint but pulsing like a dying heartbeat. She crouched, reaching toward it. The closer she got, the more her reflection changed. Her eyes, her skin, she looked younger, almost like the girl in the photograph. A whisper rippled through the chamber. "Remember us." Clara's chest tightened. "I do," she whispered. "But I can't give you more." The light flickered violently. The earth trembled. Nate grabbed her arm. "Clara!" The pit exploded in a burst of freezing air. Shadows burst upward, faces screaming, voices of every generation that had ever given themselves to the mountain. The light consumed the ceiling, ice cracking above them. Clara stumbled back, shielding her face. But through the chaos, one voice rose above the rest, familiar, weary, loving. "Clara, run," her mother, for a moment. She saw her clearly, Martha Whitmore, standing between her and the pit, arms outstretched as the light devoured her. "Go!" she cried again. "End it!" Clara's heart shattered. She grabbed the lantern, yanked the wick free, and hurled it into the pit. Flames burst, feeding on the wind, turning blue and white. The chamber screamed. The light became fire, the cold turning to heat, the snow above melting into steam. They ran, stumbling up the tunnel as the mountain roared behind them. The earth cracked, a wave of fire and frost chasing their heels. When they burst into the open air, the mine collapsed in a thunderous roar. Smoke and ice shot skyward, then silence fell again. They stood on the ridge, panting, snow melting around their boots. The mine was gone. Nothing but steam and silence. Nate turned to her, face streaked with soot. "You did it." Clara stared at the valley below. The mountain no longer felt alive. No whispers, no breath, just the stillness of something finally put to rest. She exhaled. "No, we did." That night they returned to the cabin. The wind was calm. The stars, bright, clear, almost unreal. Clara sat by the fire, staring into the flames. Her hands still shook, her mind echoing with the memory of her mother's voice. Nate sat across from her, his gaze soft. "You could have died down there." She smiled faintly. "Maybe I was supposed to. Maybe that was the only way it would have let go." He leaned forward. "But it didn't take you. That means something." Clara nodded. "It means it's done." Outside, snow began to fall again, light, harmless, ordinary snow. She closed her eyes, and for the first time she wasn't afraid of it. Weeks passed. The thaw came early that year. Grass began to show where drifts once buried the fields. Birds returned. The mountain looked gentler, though its shadow still stretched far across Pine Hollow. "An orchard," she said after a moment. "A schoolhouse, maybe even a church again, one that doesn't worship fear." Nate chuckled. "You really are your grandmother's granddaughter." Clara smiled faintly. No, I'm her undoing. Autumn crept in quietly. The leaves turned red, then gold. The nights grew cool again, but the cold never bit as deep as before. Clara stood by the fence one morning, mug of coffee warming her hands, watching the mist roll through the valley. From here, she could see everything. The orchard blooming again, the faint trail where the mine had once been, and the distant roofs of Pine Hollow catching the sunrise. Nate joined her. Unbrushing hers. "You ever wonder if they're still watching?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "If they are, I hope they're proud." They would be. The wind stirred then, soft and familiar, carrying a faint sound. Bells. She turned toward the ridge. "You hear that?" He nodded. Yeah, it wasn't eerie anymore. It was almost like laughter. That evening she walked alone up the path to the ridge. The trees whispered in the dusk. At the summit, she stopped beside the cairn of stones that marked the sealed mine. The grass around it was green now, dotted with wildflowers. She knelt, setting a single apple atop the stones. "For you," she said softly. "For all of you," the wind sighed. For a moment, she could almost see them, faint shapes in the fading light, children running through tall grass, her mother's silhouette at the edge of the clearing. Then they were gone. Clara smiled. "Sleep well." She turned back toward the valley, where lanterns began to flicker in the distance. The town glowed warm beneath the mountain shadow. The hollow, for the first time, was just land again. That night a light snow fell, the first of the season. But it didn't stay. By morning, it was gone, melted into the earth, leaving behind the smell of pine and rain. Clara stepped onto the porch, barefoot, and let the sun touch her face. No whispers, no ghosts, no weight, just wind, just life. Years later, folks in Pine Hollow would tell stories of the winter the mountain went silent. Some said the Whitmore woman made a deal to end all deals. Others said she faced the spirit herself and broke its heart. But those who knew her, who saw her walking the fields at dawn, tending her orchard, laughing in the square, they said something simpler. They said she loved the land enough to forgive it. And that, somehow, was what saved them all. When Clara Whitmore finally left Pine Hollow, she did it quietly. No fanfare, no goodbye party. She locked the cabin door, laid her hand on the oak tree one last time and whispered, "Thank you." The wind rustled the branches as if in answer. She smiled, turned toward the valley and walked away. Behind her, the mountain watched, not with hunger or sorrow, but peace. And when the last of her footsteps faded, a single blossom fell from the oak, landing gently in the snow that would never linger again. 10 years after the thaw, Pine Hollow was no longer a ghost town. The roads were paved. The mill buzzed again. And where the ruined church once stood, a new schoolhouse gleamed in the sunlight. A modest building of pine and stone, smelling of chalk, books, and rain. Children's laughter echoed through the valley every morning, carrying up into the mountains, and sometimes, when the wind turned just right, it sounded like the laughter of 3 other children, long gone, but never forgotten. It was late autumn when a black pickup rumbled up the ridge road and stopped outside Clara Whitmore's old cabin. The woman who stepped out wasn't young anymore. Her hair, once sunlit auburn, was streaked with silver, but her eyes, still sharp, still searching, had the same quiet fire. Clara stood for a long time before the door. The cabin looked different now. The porch sagged a little. Moss climbed the chimney. But the oak beside it was taller, thick with golden leaves that swayed in the wind. She reached out and touched the doorframe. Her fingers traced the small carvings Nate had once made there, initials, dates, and, faintly visible, 3 names: Elsie, Tommy, June. Clara smiled sadly. "You're still here," she whispered. She stepped inside. Dust danced in the air, illuminated by afternoon light pouring through the windows. The place smelled of wood and time. On the mantel still sat the locket, a little tarnished now, but safe. She picked it up and opened it. The photo had faded, but she didn't need it anymore. She knew every face by heart. That night Clara sat by the fire, sipping tea and staring at the flames. Outside, the mountain loomed under a harvest moon, silent, vast, watching. There was a knock at the door. When she opened it, a young woman stood there, bundled in a heavy coat, cheeks red from the cold. "Sorry to bother you." "Ma'am," the woman said, smiling nervously. "You must be Mrs. Whitmore. I'm Rose Holloway. I teach at the new school down the ridge." Clara motioned her inside. "School teacher, huh? That's a brave job around here," Rose laughed. "You'd be surprised. Kids in this town, they're different, curious, kind, and smart as fire." She set a small wrapped bundle on the table. "Brought you something." From the students, Clara unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a framed drawing, done in colored pencil, of the mountain, with 3 small children standing beside a tall woman under the oak tree. The caption read, "The Lady Who Made the Snow Sleep." Clara's breath caught. Rose smiled. "They say you saved this place. I guess I just wanted to meet you." Clara laughed softly, eyes wet. "I didn't save anything. The mountain just decided it was time." Rose hesitated, then said, "Do you ever hear them?" Clara looked up sharply. "Hear who?" "The children." Rose's voice dropped. "Sometimes when I walk home after class, I hear singing. It's faint, but it's the same tune the kids hum at recess. A lullaby." Clara felt a chill rise in her spine. "What song?" Rose hummed softly. The melody was unmistakable, the lullaby. Clara smiled sadly. "They're not gone, Rose. They're just part of the mountain now. Watching over the new ones." Rose nodded, eyes wide. "Do you think they're happy?" Clara looked out the window at the oak tree swaying in the moonlight. "Yes, I think they finally are." Later that night, after Rose had gone, Clara stepped outside. The air was cold and clear, filled with the scent of pine. She stood by the oak, looking up at the mountain peaks glowing pale under the moon. "Are you still listening?" she whispered. The wind stirred. At first it was just wind, but then it shifted, became something softer. "And a whisper, always." Clara closed her eyes. "I kept my promise," she said quietly. "No one digs, no one prays to the dark anymore. They just live." The wind rustled again, warmer now, curling around her like breath. "Thank you." She felt tears gather, but she smiled. "You don't have to thank me. You just have to rest." The branches above her trembled, scattering a few golden leaves across her shoulders. And for the first time in a decade, Clara laughed, a bright, unbroken sound that carried across the hollow. That winter, Pine Hollow waited for the storms. They always came, blizzards that howled through the valley, burying roads and breaking trees. But this year, the clouds gathered and passed. The wind rose but softened again, never howling. It was as if something was holding the storm back. "Never seen a winter like this," Nate said one night as they sat by the fire. Now gray-haired and broad-shouldered from years of labor, Clara smiled faintly. "Maybe the mountain's tired of fighting, or maybe it's keeping its promise." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the river. Nate leaned back, watching her. "You ever think about leaving again?" Clara shook her head. "No, I think this is where I belong. Someone has to remember what happened here," he nodded. "Then I'll stay too," she smirked. "You always say that," he smiled. "And I always mean it." The years passed quietly. The school grew, the orchard thrived, and the valley became known for its strange calm. No major storms, no landslides, no floods. Farmers called it the Blessed Hollow, but older folks still remembered the whispers. They told their children stories of the woman who had bought a haunted cabin for $25 and turned a curse into spring. Some believed she'd made a deal with the spirits. Others said she was one of them all along. Clara never corrected them. She spent her days teaching photography to the children, showing them how to see beauty in broken places. She kept the locket by her window, and every morning, sunlight would strike it just so, casting 3 faint beams of gold across the floor. Clara was 70 when the last winter came. It was early morning when she woke to silence. The world outside was covered in snow, untouched and perfect. She dressed slowly, pulling on her old coat and boots, and stepped outside. The oak tree shimmered with frost. The sky was clear. The mountain loomed high, wrapped in light, and in that stillness she heard it again, Children's laughter, faint but joyful, rolling across the ridge like music. She smiled. You kept your promise too. As she walked toward the tree, she felt no cold, no fear, only warmth, only peace. At the base of the oak, she paused, laying her hand against the trunk. Thank you, she whispered, for letting me stay. The wind rose gently, carrying with it the faint scent of apple blossoms. She closed her eyes. When Nate found her later that morning, she was sitting peacefully beneath the oak, a smile on her face, snowflakes melting in her hair. Beside her, the locket hung open, its photo somehow clearer than it had been in years. They buried Clara Whitmore beneath the oak. Facing the mountain, the whole town came, children, farmers, rangers, elders. Rose gave the eulogy, her voice trembling. She taught us that silence doesn't mean death, Rose said softly. It can mean peace. And she showed us that forgiveness can outlast even the coldest winter. As the service ended, the first light snow began to fall. It didn't linger. By sunset, the ground was green again. That night, the townsfolk said they saw lights dancing near the ridge, 3 small orbs glowing gold. Some said they were will-o'-the-wisps. Others said they were the Harper children, come to walk Clara home. Years later, Rose's students grew up and took over the school. One of them, a girl named June Reeves, became its headmistress. Every year on the first thaw, she would lead her students up the ridge and place fresh blossoms beneath the oak. The children would always ask, "Who was she?" And June would smile. She was the woman who taught the mountain how to sleep. When they'd ask if the ghosts were still there, she'd laugh, of course. But not the scary kind, the kind that listens, the kind that remembers. And so Pine Hollow lived on, prosperous, strange, blessed. Travelers still spoke of how calm the winters were, how the mountains seemed to hum softly on quiet nights. Some said if you camped near the ridge, you could still hear it, a woman's voice, humming a lullaby to unseen children. Others said the oak tree bloomed earlier than any other in Montana, always the first sign of spring. No one ever cut it down, because everyone knew that beneath its roots, the hollow slept, and when the wind moved through the branches, it wasn't warning anymore, it was memory. The mountain remembered the woman who came seeking peace and found family. The children who had waited a century to be freed. The man who stayed because his heart belonged to the silence. It remembered their laughter, their pain, their forgiveness, and in its quiet, endless way, it loved them back. Final lines on the first spring morning of the 50th year. A traveler stopped at the old cabin, now restored as a museum. He asked the caretaker, "Do you ever hear the wind up here?" The caretaker smiled, pointing to the oak. "Only when it wants to tell a story." The traveler listened, and faintly, like breath through the trees, came a lullaby, soft, endless at peace. The hollow sleeps, and it remembers. The morning sun rose softly over the smoky mountains, bathing the valley in pale gold. Frost clung to the edges of pine needles, and a thin mist curled above Hollow Creek like the breath of something ancient waking. For the first time in months, the house, once nothing more than a ruin of loneliness and secrets, stood alive. Smoke coiled gently from the chimney, and the laughter of children echoed faintly from within. Mary Whitlock stood by the kitchen window, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug of coffee. The warmth seeped into her palms as she watched the frost melt from the window pane. Behind her, the smell of bacon and bread filled the air. The children were seated at the table, Liam carefully buttering toast for the younger ones, Callie braiding Ruth's hair while humming a song their mother used to sing. They were a family now, bound not by blood, but by survival, love, and shared ghosts. Yet even as the morning felt almost peaceful, Mary couldn't shake the quiet tension that hung in her chest. The night before, she'd found another letter. This one wasn't from the past. It was new, freshly written, and left under her door. You can't keep them. Not all things belong to you. She didn't tell the children. Not yet. The sheriff had promised to keep an eye out for the old foreman, Elijah Boone, the man who'd been obsessed with the property's buried truth. But he'd vanished after the fire that had nearly destroyed them all. The locals whispered that Boone had perished in the flames, but Mary didn't believe it. She'd seen movement in the woods 2 nights ago, someone tall, limping, dragging something metallic through the snow. The mountains still had secrets, and Boone was one of them. The first storm by midday, clouds rolled in heavy and grey. The sound of wind scraping through the trees reminded Mary of the night the Orphans first appeared. The house creaked as if it remembered too. "Miss Mary," Callie asked, her voice soft, "can we go into town tomorrow? The church is having a Christmas fair. They said they're giving out blankets and toys." Mary smiled faintly. "If the weather holds, sure. Maybe we'll even find you some proper boots." Callie grinned, her missing front tooth making her look younger than her 12 years. "Ruth needs 'em more than me. Her toes keep poking through." Ruth giggled, hiding her face behind her hands. Mary's heart swelled and ached all at once. These children, once frightened, half-starved shadows hiding in her basement, were her light now. But light on the mountain never lasted long without something trying to take it. That evening, as the storm began, Mary walked out to the barn to check the animals. The snow had begun to fall, soft, almost pretty, and for a moment she let herself breathe. Then she saw it, a trail of footprints leading away from the barn. Deep, deliberate prints, too large to belong to a child. Her pulse spiked. She followed them with a lantern in hand, the wind howling around her like voices. The prints led down toward the creek, where the water gurgled beneath a thin skin of ice. There, half buried in the snow, lay a small tin box. Mary knelt, brushing it off. Inside were old photographs, sepia-toned, water-damaged. She squinted at one of them. A man and woman standing in front of this very house, holding 2 small children. The man's face was sharp and severe. The woman's eyes soft but haunted. On the back, written in faded ink, E. Boone and Clara, Hollow Creek, 1924. Mary's blood ran cold. The children in the picture looked like Liam and Callie. The return of Elijah Boone. The storm raged through the night. The power flickered, then went out entirely. The children slept close to the fireplace, bundled under quilts. Mary stayed awake, lantern glowing beside her chair, rifle resting across her knees. Just before midnight, she heard it, faint knocking from the back door. 3 slow knocks. She froze, every muscle in her body locking tight. Another knock, louder this time. She rose quietly, heart pounding, and crept to the door. "Who's there?" She called. A pause. Then a hoarse voice answered, "Mary Whitlock. It's time we talked." It was him, Elijah Boone. Mary swallowed hard, gripping the rifle tighter. "You're trespassing, Boone. I built this place with my own hands," he rasped. "Long before you or them children came. There are things buried here you don't understand, things that belong to me." "You've got no right to scare those kids," she said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her chest. "I'm not here for them," Boone replied. "I'm here for what they guard." She opened the door just an inch. The lantern light caught his face, half burned, half shadow. His left eye was milky white. His right burned with fanatic hunger. He looked like something that had crawled straight out of the fire. "They ain't your kin, Boone," she said. "They're children." "That's all?" Boone shook his head. "You don't know what they are. You don't know what she did. Clara, my wife. She bound this place with blood. Those children ain't alive the way you think." Mary's skin prickled. "You're insane," he smiled, slow and cracked. "Am I? Then why does that boy never sleep? Why does the girl hum songs older than she should know? Ask yourself why they never told you who their parents were." He stepped forward, and Mary raised the rifle. "One more step, Boone, and I swear," but before she could finish, the house behind her groaned. Then she heard it, soft footsteps coming from the hallway, Callie's voice. "Miss Mary?" Mary turned, and when she looked back at the door, Boone was gone, the past unveiled. The next morning the storm had passed, leaving behind a glittering silence. Mary sat at the table, the photographs spread out before her. Liam was staring at one, his brow furrowed. "That's her," he whispered. "The lady from the attic." Mary's head snapped up. "What do you mean, the attic?" Liam hesitated. "Sometimes, when it's quiet, we hear her. A woman crying up there." "Callie says it's our ma." Mary felt her stomach drop. She'd never once gone up into the attic since buying the house. It had been sealed shut by old boards. nailed deep. "Show me," she said. The children led her up the narrow stairs, past the faded wallpaper and into the hallway that smelled faintly of cedar and dust. At the end stood the attic door, the wood grey with age. Mary pried the boards loose one by one. When she finally pushed it open, a rush of cold air swept out, carrying the faint scent of roses and smoke. Inside, the attic looked frozen in time. A rocking chair, a cracked mirror, and on the floor a circle drawn in chalk, symbols Mary didn't recognize, but which made her skin crawl. At the center lay a small wooden box. Inside, a bundle of letters tied with a blue ribbon. Mary read the first one aloud. "Dearest Elijah, the children do not age. I think the house keeps them, or perhaps they keep it. I can no longer tell the difference." Her hands trembled. "Lord above," she whispered. Callie stood beside her, eyes wide but calm. "Miss Mary," she said softly, "Mama said we'd find you. Said you'd help us rest." Mary turned slowly toward her. "What did you just say?" Callie's eyes shimmered. "We've been here a long time. Since the fire. We didn't mean to scare you." Ruth began to cry, clutching her doll. Liam looked down at his hands, pale, almost translucent in the attic light. Mary staggered back, shaking her head. No, that ain't possible." Callie reached out, her hand cool against Mary's cheek. "Thank you for giving us a home, but now we gotta go." The burning light that night, Hollow Creek seemed to hold its breath. The wind stopped. The trees stood still. Mary sat by the fireplace. The children gathered close. "You don't have to go," she whispered. "You're safe here." Liam smiled sadly. "You made us safe. That's why we can leave." The air shimmered faintly around them, golden and soft. The firelight grew brighter, almost white. Callie reached for Ruth's hand, and Ruth reached for Mary's. "Tell the mountain we're sorry," Callie said. "Tell it we didn't mean to stay." And then, one by one, they began to fade, like mist in sunlight. Mary's tears fell freely as the house filled with warmth and peace, unlike anything she'd ever felt. The walls seemed to sigh, the floorboards creaking softly as if finally relieved of their burden. When the light faded, the room was empty. Only the faint echo of laughter remained, and the smell of roses lingered in the air. Epilogue, a new spring. Months later, when the first flowers bloomed along Hollow Creek, the townsfolk began to whisper again about the widow who lived alone in the house that used to be haunted. Some said she'd gone mad, talking to ghosts. Others said the ghosts had finally let her be. Mary didn't mind either way. She kept the house tidy, the garden full, and every spring she laid 3 small bouquets by the creek, one for Liam, one for Callie, one for Ruth. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, she'd hear faint laughter drifting through the trees. And when she looked up at the attic window, she could swear she saw them there, smiling, waving. As the golden light of dusk washed over the mountain, Hollow Creek was no longer cursed, it was home. The first thaw came slow that spring, like the mountain itself was deciding whether to forgive the world below. Snow melted off the pine branches in heavy drops, trickling down to the black soil where new shoots of green dared to grow. The air carried that faint sweetness of wet bark and thawing earth, a scent Clara had come to recognize as renewal. She stood at the edge of the clearing where the cabin once stood. Only the stone foundation remained now, moss-covered and half-buried. The fire that consumed the rest had been both mercy and burial. In her hands she held a camera, the same one she'd brought here months ago. The lens was cracked, the body dented, but it still worked. Through it she framed the valley below, the river snaking through the trees, the morning mist lifting from its surface like memory itself, rising to breathe. Behind her, footsteps crunched softly through the snowmelt. "You're really leaving?" Nate's voice came from the tree line, low and careful, as if he were afraid to disturb the silence that had settled over this place. Clara turned slightly, smiling faintly. "I've been leaving since the day I arrived. Guess it just took the mountain this long to let me go." He stopped beside her, hands in his jacket pockets. He'd grown thinner since that night, or maybe just quieter. The lines around his eyes seemed deeper, but not older. Wiser, maybe. "Sheriff says he's closing the case," Nate said after a moment. Said there's not enough left to explain what happened here. There never was, Clara replied. She lowered the camera and looked toward the tree line where the snow had melted into dark, wet streaks. Maybe some things aren't meant to be explained, Nate nodded slowly. You really think they're gone? Clara looked up at the sky. A crow circled once above the ridge, then disappeared into the clouds. Gone? No, but I think they're free. For a while, neither of them spoke. The forest hummed softly, water dripping, wood shifting, wind moving between the trees like breath. Clara closed her eyes and listened. She could almost hear it beneath the natural rhythm. Faint laughter, light footsteps, a lullaby carried on the wind. Elsie, she whispered. Tommy, June, the names felt like prayers now, not to summon, but to thank. Later, they walked back to the truck together. The road had turned to mud in places, and Nate had to steady her once when her boot slipped. They both laughed, the sound startlingly human after months of fear and ghosts. At the truck, Clara hesitated. I'm not sure where I'll go, she admitted. Maybe west, maybe find some work again, or just drive until I stop feeling like the earth is listening, Nate nodded. If you find a place like that, send me a postcard. I could use the quiet, she smiled faintly. You wouldn't last a week. Maybe not. He looked toward the burned remains of the cabin, the wind tugging at his jacket. Still, the mountain's quieter now, like it's finally resting. Clara followed his gaze. The clearing looked peaceful, impossibly so. Wildflowers had already started to push through the ash, small and stubborn. Nature's way of saying life continues even after ghosts. She took one last photo, the flowers against the blackened stone. It felt like the right image to end with. That night, Clara stayed at the small motel in town, the same one she'd slept in her first night here. She couldn't bring herself to drive farther yet. The owner, Mrs. Talbot, recognized her and didn't ask questions, just handed her the key and said, You take care now, Miss Whitmore. In the quiet of the room, Clara unpacked her bag and found the old wooden music box among her things, the one she'd found in the cabin's cellar weeks ago, half buried under the boards. She wound it once and set it on the nightstand. The lullaby began to play, faint, slow, imperfect, but this time the sound didn't chill her. It filled the room with a strange peace. As she drifted toward sleep, she thought she heard soft footsteps in the hallway outside, 3 sets, light as whispers. She didn't open her eyes. She didn't need to. Some part of her knew they were saying goodbye. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot. Clara rebuilt the cabin slowly, with Nate's help. They sanded the old floors, fixed the roof, replaced the broken window panes. The place smelled of pine and smoke and something new. Life. Sometimes she caught whispers in the wind, faint laughter carried through the trees. Not haunting, but memory. At dusk one evening, as the sun slipped behind the ridge, she stood by the oak tree where they'd buried the Harpers. 3 small stones marked the spot. The dried flower she'd planted had taken root. Tiny green leaves reached for the light. She smiled. You're free now. The breeze stirred, soft as a sigh. That night she dreamt of the cabin again, but this time it was bright with morning sun. The children played in the yard, their laughter echoing through the pines. Ruth sat on the porch knitting. Martha was beside her, humming that old lullaby. Clara stood at the gate. For the first time, they all looked up and smiled, and when she woke, the first light of dawn filled her room. On the nightstand beside her bed lay a single page torn from Tommy's sketchbook, one that hadn't been there before. It showed the cabin surrounded by spring grass. Above it, written in careful, childlike letters, "Thank you for remembering." The mountain was silent that morning, and for the first time in Pine Hollow's history, winter did not return early. Spring came late to Pine Hollow, but it came all the same. By the first week of April, the snow had melted from the valley floor, leaving ribbons of mud and clusters of wild crocus pushing through. The river, once buried under ice, ran again, its voice sharp, cold, alive. Clara stood on the porch steps, boots muddy, sleeves rolled up. She'd been working since dawn, hauling lumber, fixing fences, planting seeds in the soil her ancestors had once feared. The air smelled different now. No more iron, no more frost. Just pine sap, earth and rain. The mountain looked smaller somehow, less like a god, more like land. Nate came up the trail with 2 shovels slung over his shoulder. "You're supposed to take breaks, you know," he called out. Clara grinned faintly. "Can't. The thaw's perfect for planting." "It won't last." He handed her a canteen. "You said that yesterday." She took it, drinking deeply. "Yesterday wasn't this quiet." He looked toward the ridge. "You're right. Haven't heard the wind moan in weeks." "It's not moaning," she said softly. "It's resting." By noon, they reached the orchard at the edge of her property, what had once been Ruth Whitmore's pride. Most of the trees were dead, blackened by frost or rot, but 3 still stood tall. They began digging near one of them, the earth still cool and damp. "What are we planting?" Nate asked. Clara set down a small wooden box. Inside were seeds wrapped in old newspaper. "Apple. My mother kept them. Said they were from before the pact," he smiled. "Then they belong here." They planted in silence, the rhythmic sound of shovels biting into soil. Above them, the clouds drifted slow and harmless. For a moment, it almost felt like a normal life. Then, from down the ridge, a sound carried faintly on the wind. Bells. Not church bells. Wind chimes. Clara froze. "You hear that?" Nate listened. "Yeah, coming from town." She wiped her hands on her jeans, uneasy. "There's no chimes in town. Not since the fire." They followed the sound through the valley path. The grass shimmered with dew, birds scattering as they passed. The closer they got, the clearer the chimes became, soft, deliberate, almost melodic. When they reached the old church ruins, Clara stopped. There, hanging from what was left of the bell tower, was a string of chimes fashioned from glass and wire. They swayed gently, catching the light, but no one had hung them there. Clara moved closer, her boots crunching over ash. "Someone's been here," Nate frowned. "Or something." At the base of the tower she found something half buried in soot, a locket. She brushed it clean. Inside, a photo of a young girl. June Harper. Clara's breath caught. "She's still here," Nate whispered. "No," Clara said, voice trembling. "She's free. This is just what's left behind." The wind blew again, setting the chimes in motion. The sound was beautiful, lonely but gentle. Nate reached for her hand. "Maybe it's their way of saying goodbye." Clara closed the locket and pressed it against her chest. "Then let's listen." They stood there as the chimes sang in the wind, until the sound faded back into silence. Back at the cabin, Clara hung the locket beside the door. It caught the evening light, casting a faint reflection on the wall, almost like a child's shadow waving before disappearing. For the first time since she'd arrived, the cabin felt like home. She cooked that night, real food, not rations. Potato stew, biscuits, coffee. The smell filled the air, mixing with wood smoke and rain. Nate sat across the table, grinning. "Never thought I'd see the day you cooked for 2. She rolled her eyes. "Don't get used to it," he laughed. Too late. They ate in silence after that, both listening to the crackle of the fire and the distant sound of the river. At one point, Clara asked quietly, "Do you ever think about leaving?" "Every day," Nate said. "Then I remember what's here." She nodded. "Same. Still," he said, setting down his cup. "The town's rebuilding. Folks talk about starting fresh. You could teach again." Clara looked out the window. "Maybe, but I think I'm supposed to stay, at least until the thaw's done." Nate smiled softly. "Then I'll stay too." That night she dreamed again, not of ghosts or storms, but of a summer long gone, her as a child, barefoot in the meadow, her mother hanging laundry on the line. The air warm, the sound of cicadas thick and golden. She turned in the dream and her grandmother was there too, sitting on the porch, sewing something white. "Did I do it?" Clara asked them. Ruth smiled faintly. "You did what we couldn't." Martha reached out, tucking a strand of Clara's hair behind her ear. "The mountain sleeps now, honey. But remember, peace isn't forgetting. What do I do now?" Her mother smiled sadly. "Live." The word echoed, and Clara woke to morning sunlight flooding through the window. By midsummer, Pine Hollow had changed. The town streets, once grey and silent, now bustled with life. Kids ran barefoot through puddles. Men repaired fences and painted signs. Where the church once stood, a small garden grew wild. Someone had planted flowers between the ruins. No one knew who. Clara visited every Sunday, leaving small offerings, fresh apples, sometimes just a few words whispered into the wind. Nate found work helping rebuild the mill by the river. He came home late, always covered in sawdust, always smiling. For the first time in generations, Pine Hollow laughed again, and yet there were nights when Clara would wake and swear she heard it, the faintest hum, deep beneath the earth. Not anger, not warning, just breath, like a sleeping thing dreaming peacefully. One evening, near the end of August, a letter arrived from the county office. She opened it at the table. Inside was a deed, official, notarized, transferring ownership of the entire Hollow Valley to her. Nate whistled. "That's a lot of land," Clara nodded, tracing the embossed seal with her thumb. "More than I wanted. There's history buried there." She folded the paper carefully. "Then maybe it's time to make new history," he smiled. "What are you thinking?"